Hoffer argues, and this is near and dear to my heart, you will recognize, because the idea of creativity has been one that I have been focused on since I was a child, really. The idea of creativity, for instance, in science, creativity and analysis come together in the best science, and many people who aren't scientists imagine that science is just about just about arraying things and organizing them and then, seeing patterns emerge, something. But there is such deep creativity in many of the, more of the earlier parts of the scientific method. And it has often seemed to me that creatives, that people who are deeply creative, which includes many scientists and engineers, are more resilient, are more resistant to the kinds of mass movements and ideologies that they are advertising. And Hoffer has a couple of explanations for why that might be the case. In part, he says because creativity is a cure for boredom. He says when people are bored, it is primarily with their own selves that they are bored. The consciousness of a barren, meaningless existence is the main fountainhead of boredom. You will remember when our children were very young, I was clear with them that they would not proclaim themselves bored, because that was a failure on their part.
On their part, yep.
That is an insane thing to declare yourself. That should you say that out loud, that is demonstrative of a failure in your own head. And not to say again that there are some people alive who actually just do not have the tools with which to cure their own boredom. And of course, that the advertisers and the consumer, the marketplace of stuff as opposed to ideas, has made it really, really easy to run up against the end of your own abilities. But certainly among children, there is no excuse for letting a child declare themselves bored and to walk in and as an adult and say, I'll cure that for you. No, you let the kid solve their own boredom. He also says poverty, of which he's speaking about actual poverty, not having enough money. Poverty, when coupled with creativeness, is usually free of frustration. I'm not sure I agree with this, but it's an interesting claim. Poverty, when coupled with creativeness, is usually free of frustration. Before I go on, remember, this is a guy who worked as a railroad yards and as a stevedore and a longshoreman. So he is not speaking as a man from economic privilege.
Could you say the sentence again?
Poverty, when coupled with creativeness, is usually free of frustration. This is true of the poor artisan skilled in his trade and of the poor writer, artist and scientist in the full possession of creative powers. Nothing so bolsters our self-confidence and reconciles us with ourselves as the continuous ability to create, to see things grow and develop under our hand, day in, day out. The decline of handicrafts in modern times is perhaps one of the causes for the rise of frustration and the increased susceptibility of the individual to mass movements. So this just dovetails beautifully with things that we have said from many avenues, right? That those who actually can do something physical, and we have said it in terms, sport isn't inherently creative, although there is a kind of creativity in figuring out how to move your body in the world and how to interface, depending on if it's you against a mountain or you against a ball and another opponent, or a whole team. That it's a different kind of creativity than finding the form in the stone, or putting the words on the page, or deciphering the pattern and generating the hypothesis, right? These are all different kinds of creativity, but what you're doing in each case is finding meaning through creating, I don't know what other word to use, something that did not exist before, right? And that the ability to watch something come into existence that did not exist before, that you did, cannot leave you bored. You just can't be bored if you're doing that, right? And finally, in this section, with regard to creativity, Hoffer asks, whence come the fanatics? Mostly from the ranks of the non-creative men of words. The most significant division between men of words is between those who can find fulfillment in creative work and those who cannot. The creative man of words, no matter how bitterly he may criticize and deride the existing order, is actually attached to the present. His passion is to reform and not to destroy. When the mass movement remains wholly in his keeping, he turns it into a mild affair. Sure, I agree with that, but the reforms he initiates are of the surface, and life flows on without a sudden break. But such a development is possible only when the anarchic action of the masses does not come into play, either because the old order abdicates without a struggle, or because the man of words allies himself with strong men of action the moment chaos threatens to break loose. And he then provides basically a number of examples of what he calls non-creative men of words, including people like Hitler, who he says these are people who aspired to be artists or writers and just couldn't hack it, right? They didn't have it in them. And their aspirations to do something that they were actually incapable of doing is part of what turned them into the despots that they were.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm reminded also of one of my favorite books, which now I'm going to forget the name of, by Crawford, Shopcraft as Soulcraft, in which here we have a deeply smart, analytically inclined, creative man who, with a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago, who goes to work inside the Beltway, writing reports that 10 people will read and that he's not sure will make any difference at all, and gives it up for a life that he finds much more fulfilling, restoring vintage motorcycles at his own shop in Virginia, I think. And it is, Shopcraft as Soulcraft is the name of the book. It is extraordinary. And I'm not arguing that you need to be doing something physical in order to find your creative outlet. Although I think if you have a creative outlet that also has some physical aspect to it, you're less likely to be fooled by it. That even those who are talented, who are truly creative in fields that have no physical ramification, can probably more easily be turned into basically propagandists, can more easily have their skill with words or art be turned into people who are doing the work of some mass movement, as opposed to, if you're a craftsman, and either you've built a table that is both functional and beautiful, or you have not, it is harder to become a tool of the ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. There is an awful lot to having succeeded in some place that allows you to know what success means, rather than finding that judgment through somebody else who decides that you are successful and leaves you open to being manipulated.
Exactly. Okay. Individual creatives aren't sufficient, though. So for me, I grok at a fairly deep level, and this is why we were successful as professors working with individual students, how to help individuals find their own creative, analytical, productive core self, and to help make individuals resistant to things like mass movements. But individuals resisting isn't really sufficient, because absent a unifying rhetoric, values of democracy and decency are likely to lose out to less nuanced and less democratic movements.